let's get started. This is lecture 6, and we're going to continue discussing geography, health, and development. We're going to start getting into some, hopefully by the end of lecture, some of the methodological stuff, and we're going to get closer to regressions today. I don't think we're going to get to regressions, but we're going to get pretty close, and definitely by Tuesday we'll get there. So problem set 1 will be passed out this evening, due next Thursday. I was kind of thinking through the next lecture or two and trying to think of the timing, so if we do go a little slower than I think, I may even push that due date back another day or two, but let's plan on this. Oh, shoot. I keep getting caught on this. There's like a chemistry, there's always like chemistry knobs here. I just keep getting caught on them. Okay. Let me do something a little more serious here. That'll work. Anyway, in terms of the problem set and the timing of the problem set, there is one question that won't rely on what we're going to get to over the next couple lectures anyway, so you can get started on that right away once I post it tonight, and then the other stuff afterwards. Okay, any questions or comments before I get started? So let's review where we were at last time. We were talking about Blumensax and all the different channels through which tropical geography or Africa's geography might affect development, and we had already gone through agriculture, so let me just review the main points and then we'll get on to health. Blumensax emphasized how Africa's rainfall patterns may be important in understanding its development. We talked about some of the historical work linking periods of low rainfall, basically bad rainfall, to bad economic growth. For instance, in the 1980s when rainfall really collapsed, just for natural reasons due to global climate patterns, that was also a period of very slow growth. So rainfall tends to be quite variable in sub-Saharan Africa. On average, it's lower than other regions, which could lead to soil aridity and lower agricultural productivity. And there are many years of extreme drought. We also talked about soil quality being low in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, with some exceptions, and then started discussing the difficulties in agricultural technology transfer from the north to the south, given the very different climatic conditions. And finally, the last point linking in terms of these agricultural factors are livestock diseases or crop pests. So these are going to link very closely to our next topic, which is health. It turns out livestock in sub-Saharan Africa are subject to a lot of tropical disease, the same way humans are subject to a lot of tropical disease. And in fact, a lot of the diseases that affect cattle, that affect other livestock, also affect humans. So trypanosomiasis, or sleeping sickness, is a major deal for cattle. It affects their mortality, it affects their milk production, etc. And in fact, until trypanosomiasis was largely controlled during the 20th century in large parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the presence of trypanosomiasis limited herd size and even the ability to do cattle herding in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. So in terms of historical wealth accumulation, because livestock are a very important way for many households to accumulate assets, tropical disease has been very important. And then again, there are many crop pests that are widespread and important. So these are the agricultural factors that Blumensax emphasized. And then sort of building on the last point on livestock disease, let's turn to human disease. So health factors. So they say another part of Africa's tropical geography that can affect labor productivity and development is poor health. Now, it turns out life expectancy today in sub-Saharan Africa is much lower than other developing regions. And part of that story certainly is the HIV/AIDS epidemic. HIV is a major killer of millions of Africans every year. It's lowered life expectancy considerably. But that's not the only part of the story. And in fact, even before the HIV/AIDS epidemic, so if we look before 1980, life expectancy in sub-Saharan Africa was already lower than other developing regions of the world. So HIV/AIDS just added insult to injury for what was already a very difficult health environment in sub-Saharan Africa. And why is it? Well, there are widespread tropical diseases, and Blumensax make the case that actually Africa's geography, the high temperatures, the very high density of important vectors, meaning vectors are the insects here that carry the parasite between people, the high density of those vectors, the temperatures, etc., just makes sub-Saharan Africa, or many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, uniquely susceptible to these tropical diseases. So I've listed a couple of them here. Yellow fever, which is mosquito-borne, is an important disease. I already mentioned sleeping sickness or trypanosomiasis, which is carried by the tsetse fly, as another disease affecting both people and livestock. Schistosomiasis, or bilharzia, is a waterborne infection where the intermediate host is a snail. So the snail carries this parasite, and if people bathe or swim or come into contact with fresh water where these snails live, these schistosomiasis-infected snails, you can become infected yourself. There are intestinal helminths or worms, which we're going to talk about soon, and on and on and on. So there's a range of tropical diseases with different vectors and spread in different ways that increase mortality, increase morbidity, meaning illness, and all those things taken together can have a big effect on labor productivity, because if you're sick, you're not going to be as productive as you'd like, plus increased mortality. And increased mortality, especially among infants, can have big implications for fertility patterns, etc. Now, in terms of the present day and the disease burden, the most important disease in sub-Saharan Africa today after HIV/AIDS is malaria. So over 1 million Africans a year are estimated to die from malaria. It's still a major killer. There's been some progress in certain places, but not nearly enough. What happens with malaria is individuals over time develop some sort of partial immunity. If you're basically hit with the malaria parasite over and over again, the malaria parasite is mosquito-borne, individuals' immune system develops some immunity. So that helps shield adults, in some cases, from the worst consequences of malaria. So folks who have partial immunity will get malaria, they'll get sick, they'll be sick for a few days, but they'll recover. The groups that are most vulnerable in terms of mortality tend to be young children, who are younger and weaker, and kids, as everybody knows, kids get sick with all kinds of infections all the time. They haven't had a chance to build up immunity. So there's a lot of mortality among young children from malaria. The other group that are susceptible are pregnant women. So pregnant women's immune responses are different than non-pregnant women's immune responses, and it makes them more susceptible to malaria infections. So they tend to get more severe cases of malaria. So these are obviously important groups to address this vulnerability. There are ways to deal with malaria. There's treatments, and there have been, over the last decade, several new lines of treatment for malaria that are more effective than older types of treatments. There's also been a big push among policymakers towards providing cheap or free, subsidized or free bed nets. So mosquito activity is greatest at night, and individuals who sleep under bed nets at night, especially bed nets treated with some sort of insecticide, will be pretty well protected. Not perfectly, but pretty well protected. So those are the kinds of issues that are discussed. When historians look at Africa's population, as best we can estimate it a couple hundred years ago, they often point to tropical disease and the very heavy burden of tropical disease, including many of these diseases here, as an important reason for why population density in sub-Saharan Africa was historically quite low. So the population per kilometer in sub-Saharan Africa was much lower than most other regions of the world, historically. Now, there's a variety of reasons why that's the case. Income levels were also relatively low 150 years ago, and wealthier societies are able to support larger populations. If you have greater agricultural productivity, you can feed more people. That's one factor. Another very important factor historically was the impact of the different slave trades that ravaged sub-Saharan Africa for hundreds of years, with tens of millions of Africans being captured and sold as slaves outside of Africa. That was an important factor affecting African population growth. But tropical disease is really important too. So there's a variety of explanations for Africa's demography or demographic patterns, but disease is part of it. So remember we talked about soon, sub-Saharan Africa in a few decades is going to be close to a quarter of the world's population in lecture 2. Well, 150 years ago, they were about 4% of the world's population in sub-Saharan Africa. That's a huge change. Let me pause for a second and see if there's any comments or thoughts. So that's the second factor. The third factor that Bloom and Sachs discuss are transport costs, transport factors. Transport costs are things that economists talk a lot about and think a lot about, and international trade model, they figure in our models of international trade. Since economic theory tends to emphasize the benefits from trade, any sort of cost that limits the ability to trade is seen as something that can be quite detrimental. Beyond trade costs, beyond, if transport is expensive, beyond being hard to trade goods, it may also become, especially during, the period before iPhones and all that, harder also to exchange information, ideas, technology. So the inability to go from one place to another can have a variety of economic consequences in terms of trade, technology transfer. And again, Africa's geography inherently raised trade costs. This is Bloom and Sachs' argument. So if you look at the number of kilometers of coastline in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, etc., and compare it to the number of square kilometers of land area, you can create a ratio. So those are the ratios that are on the slide here. This is the ratio of coastline to land area. Or maybe it's land area. Is it coastline to land area? Yeah, coastline to land area. That's what this ratio is. And the ratio is about 1 in sub-Saharan Africa. The ratio in South Asia is about twice as high. And I'll show you a map in a sec which kind of makes that clear visually. In Western Europe, it's much higher. So if you think of Western Europe, you think of the Greek peninsula and islands, the Italian peninsula, the Iberian peninsula, England, which is an island, Ireland, which is an island. These are all islands. There's tons of coastline relative to land area. And then you have sub-Saharan Africa, vast continent with lots of territory that's literally thousands of kilometers from the ocean. So you can kind of see this on the map. If you look at Europe, especially the scale here, you see how Europe just looks like this land of isthmuses and peninsulas and islands. And that matters a lot historically, because historically, the cheap way to trade was by water. You build a boat, you put up a sail, and it takes you where you want to go. Going by land in the era before railroads was incredibly expensive. There were terrible roads. You had to go basically on paths by horseback. So moving lots of cargo on bumpy roads in a horse-drawn cart took forever, basically. Yeah. Rivers are obviously important. We'll talk a little bit about rivers on the next slide. So rivers are going to be very important to the story as well. River transport, if you have a navigable river, is also great. Sea or river transport. Water transport is cheap historically. Land transport is expensive till the railroad. So again, look at this map. Southeast Asia, tons of islands, peninsulas. Sub-Saharan Africa is this massive continent where lots of territory is very far from the ocean. So historically, again, the claim was if you counted the time costs and monetary costs, traveling by land was about 15 times more expensive than traveling by water. So this could be sea or river. We'll talk about rivers. It was a good point. 15 times. So it just wasn't practical to travel by land, typically. It's not a coincidence that the great world capitals in most parts of the world are big port cities. That's where you could trade. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Explain the last point. So you're saying because sub-Saharan Africa is across so many different, big range in latitude, what's the advantage of that? Yeah, so to the extent that trading across these different zones is good because we have different products and we find that very profitable, then the point that's made, which is an interesting point, is you could go from, say, South Africa up the western coast of Africa to tropical regions, Nigeria, say, and be trading very different products. Okay, and for sure, historically there was a lot of trade, say, in West Africa, long before European exploration, so there was a lot of seaborne trade. That said, these vast interior regions are still going to be kind of far from the coast. So, as a fraction of all, if you think of, imagine the following. What fraction of a continent, this isn't the figure that I have, it's a little bit similar. What fraction of the continent is within, say, 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers of the coast? A pretty decent share of European territories within 30 kilometers of the coast. A very tiny share of African territories within 30 kilometers of the coast. That's another way of thinking about it. You raise a good point. Okay, rivers. A very good point was raised about rivers. What about river transport? Africa has these famous massive rivers, the Nile, the Congo, the Niger, the Zambezi. They go way into the interior. It just turns out the problem with it is they all have massive waterfalls and cataracts. It's hard to navigate these rivers. So, from thousands of years ago, the Egyptians figured out, maybe we have this great river, the Nile, we can only go so far, and beyond that point, our boats can't go because there are these cataracts, they're waterfalls. So we'd have to sort of, sail our boats there, disassemble our boats, carry them up the waterfalls, and then we can navigate another however many kilometers. There'd be another set of cataracts, we have to do the same thing. It doesn't become practical to do that. Of the major rivers in Africa, the most navigable is the Congo, but only overstretches. So there are two major sets of falls on the Congo, and they have these colonialist names still. Livingstone and Stanley. Like that story, Dr. Livingstone, yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. So it turns out you can sail, the Congo is navigable from the coast to Livingstone Falls. Then you have to go a couple hundred kilometers on rail to Kinshasa, the capital. But from Kinshasa all the way to Kisangani, which is a tremendous, which is thousands of kilometers, the Congo is actually navigable. And that's a major transport artery in Central Africa. So there are stretches that are navigable. But again, there are falls at Kisangani, and it becomes hard to, continue past them. So, there are basically rail bypasses, but it does complicate navigation. And historically, again, the falls at what are now called Livingstone Falls made it difficult to trade from the interior out to the Atlantic. anything beyond, to the west of those falls, sure, you can navigate, but that's a relatively short distance. So inherently, going from the interior of Africa to the coast had high transport costs historically. That's the point. Bloom and Sachs say, you might have thought that because of this, the disadvantages to living in the interior of the continent, no one would choose to live there. That over time, everybody would live on the coast in these big port cities, but it doesn't turn out to be the case. Actually, 28% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa lives in countries that are landlocked. And even in the non-landlocked countries, many people may live very far from the coast. Congo would be an example. All of eastern Congo is pretty isolated from the great ocean. So a big share of population lives in landlocked countries where transport is that much more difficult and costly. Finally, another, do you have a comment? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of debate on this, and there's some recent work suggesting it may also relate to the slave trade. So if you lived in sub-Saharan Africa in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, the period where millions and millions of Africans were being captured and taken as slaves, the upside of being in a coastal area and port was you could trade and all the advantages of low transport costs. The downside is you might be much more likely to be captured and sold as a slave. So historically, there were numerous groups that went to more and more remote areas or rugged areas because it was harder to be captured. It made it harder to be captured. There's a paper, if you guys are interested in this, there's an interesting paper by an economic historian at Harvard, Nathan Nunn. He has a series of papers, actually, on basically economic history papers on the slave trade in Africa. One paper looking at which countries were hardest hit by slave trading and looking at subsequent economic performance. He has another paper looking at this ruggedness idea that some groups moved into the interior of these remote areas precisely because the transport costs were high. Because the transport costs were high, the slave traders wouldn't try to get you there. So they're famous groups with people often talk about the Dogon in Mali. It's an ethnic group in a remote part of Mali that I think their oral histories even suggest that slave trading played a role in sort of pushing them north, far from the coast, where they couldn't be preyed upon by slave traders. So if you're interested in this issue, you can refer to Nunn's work. But so it was a very difficult trade-off communities and individuals faced during those centuries and centuries of slave trade. Yeah. So again, if there's studies showing whether if you develop navigability, if it'll lead to more development, you mean, or? Yeah, there are some projects being discussed now in the works. All these rivers have hydropower already, and hydropower is a big source of power in much of sub-Saharan Africa. There are sometimes unintended consequences of those projects as well. Creating reservoirs can affect the local disease environment. Many of the vectors we were talking about are waterborne, or mosquitoes do well in damper areas, and so it's a complicated issue to understand the full sort of benefits of those projects and the cost of those projects. But there's been a lot of discussion as part of this whole push towards infrastructure development in Africa, towards greater exploitation of hydropower. There's big projects that are going to come online in Ethiopia in the next couple of years, like massive projects that can power much of East Africa. And I'm not sure, I don't know enough about the Congo to be honest, but I know that there already are hydropower plants at Livingstone Falls. There's the Inga Dam, there's a large dam there, but I don't think it's affected the navigability for some reason, but I don't know enough about the topography of that part of the river. Yeah. 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 It's a good point. That's right. So even if historically the slave trade played a role in moving people into the interior or keeping them in the interior, since the Europeans divided up sub-Saharan Africa in 1885, the famous Berlin Conference of 1885, it's been harder for populations to move where they wanted to. Now that said, there's plenty of movement across borders, across very sort of ill-defined and poorly enforced borders, and tons of smuggling and informal migration stuff. So the borders are only sometimes sort of enforced, I would say. And it's an interesting question to think about. Over the next 50 years, will we see an acceleration of that movement towards the coast if constraints have changed? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good question. Yeah. Can you speak up a little bit? Yeah, so that's an interesting, in the East African Rift Valley, in the last lecture I put a map up showing it. Some of those areas, which are quite isolated and inland, have the best disease environment, the best soil, the best agricultural productivity, and historically had some of the highest population densities in sub-Saharan Africa. What is today Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, et cetera. There are parts of Eastern Congo as well. So that's another factor, and it's just one of these ironies that this area that is inherently productive in terms of agriculture and low disease burden happens to be far from the coast. And if it had been right next to the coast, there could be trade advantages. So that's another factor for sure. Okay, another thing, and I won't put the map of the world up again, is large parts of sub-Saharan Africa are just located very far in terms of kilometers from the major industrialized economies. So contrast North Africa with many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. North Africa is very close to Europe, where the Industrial Revolution took place, where income levels rose dramatically in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. That's an inherent trade advantage. Think of Mexico being near the United States or Central America. Again, the distances are quite small, or Korea's location near Japan, once Japan industrialized. There's no equivalent on the border of most sub-Saharan African countries. There's no Germany or Japan or the US that's just a few kilometers away. Now, sub-Saharan Africa is massive, as we saw, and if you're thinking of countries in the northern part of sub-Saharan Africa, well, then by, say, air travel, it's not that far to Europe, and certain industries have been able to take advantage of that proximity, but it isn't really immediate proximity to a very developed market with all the transport cost advantages of that. Did you ever hear that?